السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا مولانا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا قائد الغر المحجلين وشفيع المذنبين وسيد ولد آدم ولا فخر محمد بن عبد الله الهاشمي القرشي وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه. ثم أما بعد. So we're at our penultimate session, at least for the time being. The journey is the destination, looking particularly at this reading that we're doing of a book entitled Qutb al-Arifin, written sometime in the 6th century of the Hijrah, roughly around the same century as Imam al-Ghazali, for example. And so far what we've been seeing in this particular set of chapters dealing with spiritual refinement and spiritual discipline as we're ending towards the end of these set of chapters is if one does indeed want to avail themselves of a higher reality and a higher spiritual consciousness and awareness of those realities, then really the main thing is to get a hold of oneself and to get a hold of one's passions and one's ego and one's desire and so forth, because there's really nothing in the way. It's there, but as the author said, one needs to polish the mirror of their heart, so the heart is merely reflecting the reality. So if there's blemishes, just like if there's a concave or a convex mirror, or there's some discoloration in the mirror, then that which is reflected, the image which is reflected in the mirror, will not faithfully reflect the reality of that thing. So the image will look distorted. And basically this is the metaphor we use to describe how people look at things and interpret things, and sometimes it can reach a level of ultimate disconnect with reality. Some people just see things that are not there, or they perceive intentions and motivations of others that are not there. And as we said in previous sessions, this goes back to their own mirror. So if their mirror is distorted, right, then they will tend to be suspicious of everyone else. And if someone has a polished mirror for the heart, then they tend to try to think the best of people. This doesn't make them necessarily naive or make them fall easy prey to connivers and charlatans and so forth, because also the reality will be reflected like this. But even if they sense this discrepancy in the motivations and intentions of others, it does not lead them then to condemn the essence of that person, right? Al-Dhawat. Rather, it says, okay, there's a particular situation, maybe there's a background we're not aware of, so forth. And so they take a Rabbani, right, a Lord-like stance on this, which is to give people a second and third and fourth chance, and to be Rahim, and to be merciful, and to be lenient, and to be clement, and so forth. And that comes with these beautiful character traits that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that's why he came. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمِ الْأَخْلَاقِ أَوْ مَصَالِحِ الْأَخْلَاقِ أَوْ صَالِحِ الْأَخْلَاقِ في رواية. I have not come except to complete perfect character, beautiful character. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ مُعَلِّمًا. I have not been sent except as a teacher. So to be in that particular space of absorbing these meanings and then being able to conduct yourself and to engage with all of the different relationships, both human and otherwise, so even with other creatures, with animals, with the environment, with the water that you use to make wudu, for example, to be just in the manner by which you use it. And Prophet ﷺ also did not leave that stone unturned, and he said that that one should be economical in the water that they use. وَلَوْ كَانَ عَلَى نَهْرٍ جَارٍ. Even if you were on the banks of a flowing river, right, which seems like an endless supply of water, but nevertheless, this is the manner of engagement of the believer with everything around them. And in a sense, then they sacralize everything. Everything then has a sacrosanctity, right, an inviolability, or what we call a hurma, to it that should not be violated and should not be transgressed. So, inshallah, these are the things that we're striving for and we're aiming for. So, as I said, penultimate session, so we have 2 more today, this session and the next one. And in these last few sections, he's looking at particularly the Quran, or the manner by which people can interpret and understand things from the Quran. And we had begun this in the previous session that he started talking about it, and that some people will be privy to deeper and more profound meanings of the Quran, and this may not necessarily be commensurate with their level of Arabic or how well they understand Arabic rhetoric, even though that's certainly a consideration and a part of it. But it's going to be more about the stillness and the pureness of their heart, in the manner by which they will not just understand and comprehend the Quran, but the meanings that will then penetrate their heart. And it's our assertion, I think, as we said in the previous session, that this will come about even if someone doesn't understand the words of the Quran. So it's quite possible someone whose first language is not Arabic or doesn't understand the Quran but's reading it, that the meanings can penetrate even though you don't know the meanings of the words. And there's a hadith in Mosaad Ahmad that kind of, there's an ishara, there's an indication that, one, not the indication, but the meaning of the hadith, that one will reap the reward of reading the Quran, whether they understand it bil-fahmi wa min ghayri fahm, with understanding and without understanding. So there's an indication, an ishara, that that reward may not just be the reward of the tilawa, of the qira'ah, of reading it per se, but also something else that may come that will affect one. Wallahu a'lam. So this next section that we're embarking upon, faslun min asrar al-Qur'an al-Kareem. Min asrar al-Qur'an al-Kareem, from amongst the secrets of the Qur'an al-Kareem. واعلم رحمك الله أن القرآن بحر عميق لا ساحل له. He says, know that the Quran is a deep or vast ocean. There's no shore to it. ومثل ختمتك له بالقراءة وحفظك العبارة عنه كمثل رجل نظر إلى بحر لجي لا ساحل له فلم يعرف من البحر إلا لون ظاهره وعزبت معرفته عن الجواهر واليواقيت التي اشتمل عليها قعره وغموضه وما لا يتأتى للناظر رؤيته. So he says, the similarity in your reading of the Quran or completing the Quran, khatma bil qira'ah, by tilawa, and your memorization of the ibara, memorization of the words of the Quran, is like someone who looks to a deep, vast, dark ocean, la sahila lahu, no shore to it, and he does not know anything of the sea except the outward color of the sea. So you might see it like darker or less dark, and obviously that depends upon what's underneath it, or you might see it as blue, but that's what you see. You don't see beyond that. That's why he says, وَعَزَبَتْ مَعْرِفَتُهُ عَنِ الْجَوَاهِرِ وَالْيَوَاقِيتِ, right? And he's unable, the knowledge does not penetrate the jawahir and the yawaqit, which are the pearls and the rubies, or the jewels and the rubies that are underneath. And Imam al-Ghazali, actually, when his book Jawahir al-Quran, he talks about also jawahir and yawaqit. He also divides them into jewels and rubies, talking about particular verses of the Quran. So anyway, here, so the knowledge does not penetrate to the inner part of the Quran, right, which he describes here as jewels and rubies. التي اشتمل عليها قعره, right, so the qa'r is the deepness of the ocean. That's where you find them. وغموضه, and where you can't see from the outside. وما لا يتأتى للناظر رؤيته, right, and that which for someone who's looking from far away can't see them. واللون الظاهر مثل الأمر والنهي, and he said that outward color is like the amr and the nahi, is like the commands of the Quran and the prohibitions of the Quran. Wal-wa'd wal-wa'id, right? Wa'd and wa'id is the promise of reward or the threat of punishment. Wal-mawa'idh wal-amthal, وَمَا تَقُومُ بِهِ الْعِبَادَات, right? Wal-mawa'idh and admonitions and amthal, parables, stories of the Quran. وَمَا تَقُومُ بِهِ الْعِبَادَات, right? And then those things pertaining to ibadah, right? يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ, right? آيَةُ الْوُضُوء. These are ibadat, these are acts of worship. So the Quran does talk something about that. But he describes all of that as al-lawn al-zahir. That is the outward aspect of the Quran. And as I should mention, Al-Ghazali takes the same approach. So if you read Jawahir al-Quran al-Ghazali, he says a very, very similar thing. And I would not be surprised if Al-Laja'i is basing his description here on something he read from Ghazali. وقد اشتمل القرآن على جواهر ويواقيت موجود فيها ما أشرنا إليه ورمزنا نحوه لإخفائه لمن لم يقف على القشر الظاهر ورقي للتغلغل في بحار الأسرار. He said, and the Quran, it contains within it, as we said, jawahir and yawaqit, they're within it, these jewels and these rubies. ما أشرنا إليه ورمزنا نحوه لإخفائه, right? And that which we have indicated sometimes, right, throughout the text as we've seen, ramazna, so the ishara and the rams, and they said the rams is deeper than the ishara. The ishara is a subtle indication, and the rams is even subtler than that. لإخفائه, so we use subtle indications because it is subtle. The nature of it is subtle. You can't really express it outwardly or overtly, I should say. لمن لم يقف على القشر الظاهر ورقيت للتغلغل في بحر الأسرار, especially for someone who only has stopped at the qishr al-zahir, right, the one who's on the outer shell of the Quran and doesn't see more than that, and has not risen to dive into, right? Basically, we're saying at-taghalghul is like diving, or raqiya is to rise. So rise to dive into the bihar al-asrar, to the ocean of secrets that is within the Quran. So that's not going to happen for, as he said, Ahl al-Zahir, where he says, وَأَمَّا أَهْلُ الظَّاهِرِ فَقَدْ وَقَفُوا عَلَى الْقِشْرِ الظَّاهِرِ. So the people of the outward, or let's call it the exclusive outward, so they don't see the inward. And he's going to talk about this a little bit more, Zahir and Batin, and just before we get into that, it's important that in the early days of Islam, and this is after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was some contention about this issue, about what do we understand of the Quran? Is it just the outward meaning of it, or is there also inward meanings? And if there are inward meanings, how do we interpret that, and so forth? And so there were groups that came up, like the Zahiriyya. And the Zahiriyya were of the opinion that we only take what is literally meant by the Quran, or a faction of them said that at least. Then there was the opposite of that, al-Batiniyya, right? Batin means the inward. So the Batiniyya said, no, the outward meanings is not what is meant. Don't trust that. We're looking towards the Batini meanings, right? And this was closely associated with also the Ismaili, or the madhab of the Fatimid Empire. So the Batini meanings is what Allah means. So really, they were both trying to arrive at what is the divine intent behind the words and the meanings of the Quran. أما أهل السنة والجماعة, but the people of Sunnah, and let's call them the normative practice and mainstream of Islam, they said the Quran has Zahir and Batin. So the Zahir is our guide, the outward meanings are our guide, but this does not preclude our ability to interpret other meanings that are within the folds of the words of the Quran themselves. But these other meanings will never be incomprehensible or incompatible with the Zahir meaning, right, with the outward meaning. So they're never going to be contradictory. They're never going to, the outward meaning is going one way, inward meaning is going one way, and they can't both be true at the same time. They both have to be true at the same time. Just like we mentioned the verse of the other day, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, right? No one shall touch it except those who are of tahara. So outward meaning means be on wudu if you touch the pages of the Mus'haf. And then the inward meaning is the meanings of the Quran will not penetrate a heart that is impure. So both of those meanings can coexist with one another. So the way we look at it is they must coexist, that we can understand both of them at the same time without contradiction. So if, however, you stop only at the outward meaning and say there's no inward meaning, then you've taken a lot of, the potency of the Quran itself. And the opposite is true. If you say there's only a batin, then also you've robbed the Quran of what it is. So it's actually both. So when he says وَأَمَّا أَهْلُ الظَّاهِرِ فَقَدْ وَقَفُوا عَلَى الْقِشْرِ الظَّاهِرِ. So the people of Zahir, they stopped at the outer shell. They didn't go deeper than that. وأعوجت أفهامهم فنسبوا ما نزل بأفهامهم من الأعوجاج إلى من لم يحيطوا بعلمه مما سمعوا من سر الأسرار. So he said the people of the Zahir and their misunderstandings, he says وأعوجت أفهامهم, right? So, or lack of understanding, or what you could say crooked understanding. فنسبوا ما نزل بأفهامهم من الأعوجاج ما لم يحيطوا بعلمه مما سمعوا من سر الأسرار. So basically what he's saying is they heard some of the batin meanings, like لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. The meanings will not penetrate the impure heart, will only penetrate the pure heart. And they said, no, it doesn't mean that. It means you have to have wudu only and not that other meaning. And so when they heard about the meaning of this inner tahara, this inner purity, نسبوا ذلك, right, إلى الأعوجاج. They said that's wrong, that's crooked, that can't be right. مما سمعوا من سر الأسرار ما لم يحيطوا بعلمه, right, because they're not aware of it. لم يحيطوا علمهم بذلك. Their knowledge did not encompass those other meanings because they didn't taste that meaning, they didn't experience it. And this goes by the general principle الإنسان عدو لما يجهله. A person generally is going to be an enemy to that which they do not know, that which they are ignorant of. At least at first contact with such a new concept, they'll say, no, that's not right, because I never heard of it before. Unless they're what we call munsif, right? Al-munsif, the one who is, objective in their approach to things, even if they never heard them before, will say, well, I never heard that before, but it could be true. It doesn't mean because I didn't hear it, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Right? So like they say, this is another qaida, عدم الوجدان لا يدل على عدم الوجود. عدم الوجدان, which means just because you don't feel the thing is there or you're not aware that it's there doesn't mean it's not there. Maybe you didn't hear about it before, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, or that meaning can't be valid. كما أن قبيح الوجه يرى قبح وجهه في المرآة فينسب القبح للمرآة ولم يدري أن القبح بوجهه تعلق. So, not a very nice thing to say, but this is the example. He said, just like someone who's qabih al-wajh, who's not very attractive, looks in the mirror, right, and they see the ugliness in their face, and they affiliate or they blame the mirror for the ugliness, not themselves, right? So this is the same thing. وَلَمْ يَدْرِ أَنَّ الْقُبْحَ بِوَجْهِ تَعَلَّقْ. And they're not aware that it's actually the ugliness of your face. It's not the mirror. There's nothing wrong with the mirror, but it's something wrong with you. So here, these talabat ilm or students or scholars, their mirror didn't pick up on those meanings. So they didn't say that something's wrong with them. They said something is wrong with these people who don't understand. Wallahu a'lam is how I understand it. فَأَهْلُ الظَّاهِرِ لَزِمُوا الْقِشْرَ وَتَرَكُوا اللُّبَابِ. So the people of the zahir, of the outward, or the exclusive outward, لَزِمُوا الْقِشْرَ, they sufficed themselves or stayed only by the outer shell. وَتَرَكُوا اللُّبَابِ, and they left the essence. فَغُلِّقَتْ دُونَهُمُ الْأَبْوَابِ, so the doors were slammed shut for them. Those doors didn't open. وَأَهْلُ التَّحْقِيقِ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْبَاطِنِ نأوا عن ملاحظة الأسباب فرفع عنهم الحجاب وفتحت لهم الأبواب فنالوا اللباب. But the people of tahqiq, the people of actualization and verification, this is what we mean by أهل التحقيق, they verified these meanings, they actualized them within themselves. من أهل الباطن, from those who believe there's a batin meaning. نأوا عن ملاحظة الأسباب, right, they were not distracted by the asbab, right, just by the mere outward intermediate causes. فَرُفِعَ عَنْهُمُ الْحِجَابِ, so the veils were lifted from them. وَفُتِحَتْ لَهُمُ الْأَبْوَابِ فَنَالُوا اللُّبَابِ, kind of a poetic way of saying. وَفُتِحَتْ لَهُمُ الْأَبْوَابِ, then the doors were opened. فَنَالُوا اللُّبَابِ, and so they were able to achieve and understand the essence of the thing. Here, namely the meanings of the Quran, rather than just the outward qishr, the outward shell. So this is kind of actually, if you think about it, the way he's talking, it's extraordinary. Because if you look at, let's say, modern linguistic and linguistic analysis and things like that, there have been many movements that have happened. Probably the one that is most dominant right now is this thing called deconstructionism, which basically says it's not really important what the intent of the author is. All that matters is what you think it means. And you're not looking towards the intent of whatever the author said, and you can make it mean whatever you want it to make it mean. Just kind of Derrida and others is kind of oversimplification, but that's basically the crux of their argument. Whereas here we're saying, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala certainly had an intention. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is limitless. And the knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can impart to us also is limitless, because He's limitless. And so there are different ways by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can impart this knowledge to us. And one of those ways is obviously the Quran, Arabiyyun Mubin, right? It's in a clear, precise, pure Arabic language. And Arabic language is full of mysteries and secrets. And those who study even a little bit of it will see that you can't even get to the depths, the limits of what the Arabic language can express in terms of language. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "La yuhitu bil-lugha illa nabi," that no one can encompass the language except the Prophet. So, and language itself is a divine gift. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught the names of all things to Adam, knowledge which even the angels did not have at the time. So, so that's kind of still, though, at a certain level that knowledge can be imparted to us. So it's also going to be predicated on one's ability to avail oneself of those meanings on your spiritual mirror, right, on your heart. So some people only see something outward, but then others will have a deeper connection and engagement with the words of the Quran. And I'd say also this is true for the words of the Prophet ﷺ to some degree as well, but not exactly the same way as the Quran. And also to the words of the interpreters of the Quran and Sunnah. Your engagement with those texts is going to be also commensurate with, how spiritually inclined and how spiritually disciplined that you are. You read the word and it comes back to you, and then you may see something that's not there because it's something that's in you, but it's not in the text. And this is often what happens, and this is what I think deconstructionism does. You impose at a very nafsani level, right? Not at a ruhi or soulful level, but at a nafsani level of consciousness, as we've talked about earlier. And you impose that on the words. And then you want the words to mean that because that's what you want them to mean on the level of your ego, on the level of your nafs. And now we're seeing this also on the level of people imposing meanings upon Islam and wanting Islam to mean certain things and to stand for certain things because those meanings are there for them on their nafs level, right? Due to, outside influences and from intellectual paradigms other than Islam. And now they want kind of Islam to fit in the box, even though it doesn't actually fit in there. But again, based on the nafsani level. So, we don't say that, there's a monopoly on what the Quran means and what it doesn't mean, and that it's limited to a certain class of people or a certain gender of people or a certain ethnicity or so forth, and they're just kind of trying to keep people out, and it's a way to protect their position, and it's all about the patriarchy. And these are things that you read in even what some Muslims write today. But for us, at least in the Sunni tradition, anyone could be an interpreter. Anyone could be in a position to derive these meanings. But, that's going to be commensurate with what level are you engaging. If you're only engaging with your nafs, right, to use kind of a spiritual paradigm, if you're only engaging with your ego and your nafs with the text, and then you come back to us and say, these are the meanings that I think they mean, then we're going to have to measure that against the well-known criteria that have been established, throughout the centuries. And if we find that it's not standing up to scrutiny of the well-known criteria that we have, both criteria that go back to the Arabic language and to the issues of consensus within the religion and so forth, if you're violating any of those things, Doesn't matter what you call yourself or how big a sheikh you are, how big your turban is, those meanings that you extrapolate or you think you extrapolate from the Quran are going to be rejected, right? And this is pretty much what circumscribes or what's kind of the boundary or the border of how we understand Islam. If we were to remove that, there's no more Islam. Then Islam would just be this self-defined thing that anyone could define by themselves. And remarkably, all of these people who wrote books like this and Al-Ihya and there's a level of diversification and a healthy level of dissent as well. They don't always agree on everything, but they all go back to the same basic premise, the same basic framework, is that Allah certainly meant certain things or means certain things with the words of the Quran, and He wants certain things from us, and He also left it up to us to struggle and to strive, and this idea of ijtihad in deriving those meanings, and one can avail oneself of that if they are properly trained and qualified in order to do that. So, you want to be a pilot of a, well, it's now defunct, the 747, but let's say Airbus A380 or something like that, and you think you can do it, great, pilot the plane, but go through the proper training. Do the proper training, get your hours in. Then you get in there, and maybe you have a different way to land or a different way to find a different route to somewhere else. But if you've done the training, then that's something then that can be taken against the proper criteria. But otherwise, it's just your ego talking. It's just your nafs. So the next section, he strikes an example. في مثال أهل الظاهر والرسوم الواقفين مع القشر الظاهر. So the example of the people of the exclusive outward, والرسوم, and we talked about this word before, الرسوم والرسم, right, which is kind of the formalities that of the affiliations of your own existence, basically is how I translate it. الواقفين, right, waqif means to stand or to stop, but it means who do not go beyond القشر الظاهر, who fail to go beyond the outward shell. اعلم رحمك الله أن مثل أهل الظاهر كمثل قوم مروا بقصر الملك فجعلوا ينظرون إلى هيئة ظاهر القصر وزينته فحاروا وتحيروا في ذلك. ومثل أهل التحقيق من أهل الباطن كمثل قوم تركوا النظر لظاهر قصر الملك ورفضوا الأسباب التي يتعذر من أجلها فتح الباب فاقتحموا الباب فوجدوه قد فتحته العناية فدخلوا قصر الملك فرأوا فيه جواهر ويواقيت حارت فيه أبصارهم ثم نظروا إلى وجه الملك فأنستهم لذة النظر إلى وجهه كل من استكن فأشاروا إلى الناظرين إلى زينة ظاهر القصر أن ادخلوا فقالوا لهم منعنا من استماع النظر بزينة ظاهر القصر ما شغلنا عن الدخول ومنعنا من استمتاع النظر بزينة ظاهر القصر ما شغلنا عن الدخول فقال لهم الداخلون لو رأيتم ما اشتمل عليه باطن القصر من الزينة ما اغتررتم بزينة ظاهره ولو رأيتم وجه الملك رب القصر لشغلكم عمن دونه فما أدركتم يتلاشى في جنب عجزكم وخساسة حالكم. So here he's saying he says, no, may Allah have mercy upon you, that the people of the Zahir, of the exclusive outward, it's like a group of people who went to the palace of the Sultan or of the king, and they looked at the bricks and the walls and so forth of the palace from the outside, and its zina and its adornments. فَحَارُوا وَتَحَيُّرُوا فِي ذَلِكَ. So they were so impressed by the palace from the outside that they're just like looking at it, and they can't turn away from looking at that. But the people of what he calls أهل التحقيق, the people of authenticity and verification and actualization, من أهل الباطن, those who affirm the batin meanings, is like a group that left النظر الظاهر قصر الملك, so they didn't look at the outward walls of the palace, ورفضوا الأسباب التي يتعذر من أجلها فتح الباب, right, and they didn't were not distracted by any intermediate causes of how to open the door, like keys or things like that. فاقتحموا الباب, so they rushed towards the door. فوجدوه قد فتحته العناية. So rather than a key opening it, they went to the door and they found the door was open for them. What opened the door? فتحته العناية. Right? So the inaya, or the special consideration here of the king, for example, or of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an example of the Quran, opened the door for them. So they entered, and then they saw the jewels and the rubies, and this is what they were enamored with. Then they looked at the face of the king himself, and that was even more bewildering than the actual jewels and rubies. So then they went to the people who were outside and just looking at the outward part of the palace and the walls. They said, come inside. Look what we found. It's way more than what you guys are looking on outside. Then they said to them, we were prevented from entering that which busied us with looking and observing the outward construction of the palace, from going in. So the ones that entered, they said, if you had seen that which was inside, you would have not been distracted of what you see on the outside. And if you had seen the face of the king, right, the Lord over this palace, then nothing would have busied you from that, because that is the most amazing thing. فَمَا أَدْرَكْتُمْ يَتَلَاشَى فِي جَنْبِ عَجْسِكُمْ. So that which you actually have seen would be nothing, would diminish in your eyes, but this is due to your incapacity and to your khasasat halikum, right, and to your depraved state, that you didn't see more than that. And you could think of it also like a more modern example is, there are buildings that have impressive facades and, look kind of constructed in a way with ornaments and adornments and so forth. But, no one's going to say, I've been to that place unless they actually go inside, right? If you go to the steps of like a museum or something, like, and you don't go inside, but you're just looking at kind of the adornment from the outside and you see the line going in, and you're like, no, I'm just kind of like looking at it from outside. Can you say you actually have been to the Smithsonian, or you went to the Museum of Natural History or anything like that, or the Metropolitan Museum or the Louvre in Paris, unless you actually go inside? So those who don't go inside and think all that is there is the zahir, right? And this is a particular type of archetype of religiosity as well, we should mention, that tend to reduce the deen to kind of just a laundry list of do's and don'ts, and halal and haram, and which of course no one is denying that's part of the deen, but that's not all the deen, right? And so then there's not this this deeper understanding and deeper penetration into, how is Allah communicating with us? What are the meanings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can provide for us? And this provision is something that's renewable day after day. You'll find if you keep a wird, inshallah, this is a goal everyone should have, a wird of the Quran, and something you do daily, no matter how much amount it is, you will find the Quran becomes part of you. It's you can't stay away from it. It becomes part and parcel, and you have to go back to it. And that's what wird means, like it draws you back to it. Yes, so amongst the meaning of wird is something you do regularly, but it originally means like watering hole, and so it brings you back to it, right? Because there's waridat. لولا ورد لما كان waridat. If you didn't do the wird, then there's no waridat. But waridat is what is from Allah to you. And the wird is what you do to avail yourself of the waridat, of that which is from Allah to you. So if you don't have tilawah of the Quran, if you don't have dhikr, if you don't have a regular, sessions with yourself of muhasabah, right, to review what am I doing with my life and how am I functioning in these relationships, and am I keeping up my end of the bargain or my end of the deal? Am I fulfilling these people's rights or am I not doing it? Mujalasat muhasabah ma'a nafs, to sit with yourself and to review these things with yourself. These should be awrad. These are not just things you do once in like, a moment of epiphany, maybe the first time, but then it should be something that you do regularly, inshallah. So I'm going to stop here, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala, and then hopefully we'll get through the rest of it in tomorrow's, in the next session, inshallah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.